I think we left off here. Is that correct? We were talking about the parathyroid gland.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the parathyroid gland is responsible for producing PTH, which is the parathyroid hormone. And PTH, it has a couple of functions, and we'll kind of talk about that here in a second. But it's PTH, well, it has one major function, and that is the regulation of blood calcium, right? So the PTH, the parathyroid hormone, basically it's released by the parathyroid. Then it causes the stimulation of osteoclasts, which break down calcium from bone, but it inhibits osteoblasts. Osteoblasts is what deposits calcium in bone, are the cells that are responsible for depositing calcium in bone. So when it breaks down the calcium in the bone structure, that calcium ion is then put into the bloodstream. And PTH also, it stimulates kidney tubule cells. So they recover waste calcium that's going to be found in our urine. And it also causes the kidney tubule cells to release calciocitron. And then get back to that. And so then the calciocitron will then, excuse me, trying to finish a little bit of my lunch before I can get started. Will stimulate the intestines to absorb calcium from food that's being digested. Okay, so as a result of that stimulation, we can end up back with high levels of blood calcium. So if we get high levels of blood calcium, then that causes the calcium citronin to be released. And calcium citronin basically stimulates the parafollicle cells and the thyroid. And then that, as I said, that causes the calcium citronin to be released. The calcium citronin causes that stimulation of the osteoblast. So then you're starting to get calcium deposited in bones, and you're going to be removing it from the bloodstream. And it's going to inhibit the calcium. It inhibits the osteoclast, which is known for breaking down this bone. Okay, so again, we have a negative regulator, a negative feedback loop, kind of controlling the system of calcium homeostasis. So if the levels are low, if our calcium blood levels are low drop, we basically will use the blood to compensate for that. And then as those levels shoot up or rise up, then we'll turn on other effectors to sit there and cause the calcium to be deposited in the bone. So all of this is, again, being controlled by the parathyroid hormone, right? So if we have hyperactive, well, it's being regulated by the parathyroid hormone, but it's being controlled by the parathyroid gland. So if we have a hyperactive parathyroid gland, and if that happens, right? So as a result of that, we're going to get an overproduction of PTH. So when we get an overproduction of PTH, what do you think is going to happen to the individual? Can you guys see what screen are you guys seeing by the chance? I see what sees.
Figure 17.
My little one. Yeah.
You've seen both, actually.
You're
seeing both?
Yeah, there's the big one. That's better.
Okay. Okay, good. So it'll be a little bit easier to see. Okay, so real quick, we'll go through it real quick since it's a fresh job there. So normally what happens is if we have low blood level calcium, then the parathyroid gland will release parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone basically causes osteoblasts to be inhibited. We know that osteoblasts are responsible for the deposit of calcium in the bones. It causes the stimulation of osteoclasts. Osteoclasts are cells that break down calcium in our bones. And then, so then as a result of that, it breaks down that calcium in our bones, and then it's able to go into the bloodstream. It also has effects on kidneys. And in the kidneys, the PTH is going to stimulate kidney tubule cells to recover waste calcium from the urine. So then it also stimulates the kidney cells to release calcium-citrol. Calcium-citrol stimulates the intestines, and then it causes the intestines to try to pick up more calcium from food that we're digesting. As a result of that, it causes our levels to go increase. And then as our levels increase, it causes the parafollicle cells of the thyroid to release calcium serotonin, and then calcium serotonin, it stimulates osteoblasts. So that causes calcium to be back deposited into our bones, and it inhibits osteoclasts, and it basically will cause that movement of calcium from the bloodstream back into the bone. Okay, and then the cycle continues. It goes back, and so we get a nice balance. So if we get too high, it shuts down that system. We get osteoclasts made so that we start if it gets too high, we shut down that system and we start depositing calcium into the bone. If it gets too low, we start breaking down the bone to get that form of calcium, and we tell the stomach to sit there and absorb more so that we can get back to that level. So we have a nice little regulation going on both ways. So if my parathyroid gland is hyperactive, meaning that it's producing too much PTH, so we have an increase in PTH, the parathyroid hormone, what's going to happen?
The glands will grow, right?
Okay, so typically as a result of that, the glands are going to get bigger. They're going to be inflamed because they're generating way too much of that particular hormone, and they're overactive. That's true. But what's going to happen downstream? What is going to be the effects of having too much PTH?
It's gonna rise up your calcium levels.
It's going to rise up our calcium levels. That is definitely true. Where are you going to get that calcium from?
Bones
your bones. So then what's going to happen to your bones?
will become brittle.
They're going to become brittle or less dense. Okay. And so people that have parathyroidism, which is overactive parathyroid glands, they're going to overproduce that PTH. That PTH is going to result in tons and tons and tons of calcium being generated from your bones. And so your bone levels, that calcium is going to be high in the blood. Your bone density is going to be really, really low. Your nervous system is going to be, it's going to reduce the response in your nervous system because it also affects the flow because you have so much calcium ion available. It affects the sodium content as well. So that's going to start affecting the response rates. And then you're also going to sit there and get calcium deposition in places that you're not supposed to take calcium deposition because you have so much of it in your bloodstream. Okay.
So when there's too much, it's gonna try to decrease it. When there's too little, it's gonna try to increase it.
So when there's too much, right? So if there's too much, what it normally does, it'll shut it down, right? So your levels get low, and then you go through the process of decreasing it. So that means that you start putting more of it in your bone, right? So your bone is kind of like this, it's like a vault, right? That you have money in, right? So when you need the money, you sit there, you make osteoclast, it breaks it down. When you're trying to save the money, it makes osteoblast, so you deposit it. Does that make sense? You know, the analogy?
Yes.
Okay. And so in the case of hyperactive, what's happening, you're producing so much more of the PTH, that hormone, that it's causing those levels to just get out of hand, right? And so that means that your osteoblasts are overstimulated. Your osteoclasts are overstimulated, and your osteoblasts are way inhibited. So you're not depositing any calcium in the bank or in the bones, right? Instead, you have it all in the surface, and so it's being spent everywhere it's not supposed to be spent, right? So you're going to get accumulation, a lot of accumulation happening in places you're not supposed to get accumulation. You're going to get a lot of accumulation happening in your kidneys. So you're going to get your kidney stones starting to generate. You're going to get other places where you're going to get calcium deposits where you're not supposed to have calcium deposits. Okay. And so as a result of that, it's going to start impairing the body as a whole because of that. Okay. So what happens in the case of, let's say we have an increase in our thyroid, and we get overproduction of calciucitronin. Sorry, calcium-cetonin. So what happens in this case?
Overproduction, harder bones.
Okay, so yeah, in this sense, our bones are going to be, they're going to be thicker, they're going to be more dense, they're going to be harder. We're also going to have issues with what?
Kidneys.
Okay, so we're going to have these issues with kidneys. That's right. So we're going to have tons and tons of kidney issues. And our kidneys is not going to be absorbing the calcium the way it's supposed to. What else is going to happen? So in other words, we're going to be peeing out a lot of calcium. What is going to happen to the blood level of calcium? Is that going to increase or decrease?
Increase.
Okay. So it's going to continuously decrease. And then as a result of that, because we have so little blood level calcium, that's going to affect the membrane permeability to sodium. And so as a result of that, you're going to get muscle twitching, you're going to get cramping, you're going to get spasms, you're going to get convulsions. And then ultimately, you can end up with a paralysis of your muscles. Okay, and that's all muscles, so that's including the heart. So what's going to happen in that case? You'll eventually stop breathing as a result of that. So you guys see why it's so important to regulate that calcium level?
Mm-hmm. Gotta reach equilibrium or else we'll die.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Okay, so this is the adrenal gland. Okay, so we know that this guy is going to be responsible for it. It sits on top of the kidney, right? And it's responsible for the productions of epinephrine and norepinephrine. It's responsible for aldosterone, cortisol, cortisoleron, and cortisone. Okay, so we know that the epinephrine and the non-peripherin are basically our stress hormones. So those are the guys that are responsible for our flight or flight response, right?
Mhm.
And it's sort of interesting to me. It's sort of interesting that they all rely in the kidney, right? There's also, it's also responsible for the androgens, which causes our masculinity as well. We know that the glycocorticoids, they're responsible for regulating glucose metabolism. And then the aldosterons, so those actually regulate mineral balances. So that's our sodium regulators, our sodium ion regulators in the bloodstream. Okay, so again, if you have disorders with your adrenal glands, you're gonna start affecting various things, right? So let's say in the case of our adrenal glands, if we have a defect in our adrenal glands, we know that you're going to sit there affect blood glucose levels, right? So then that could end up giving us hypoglycemia, right? So where we had elevated levels of the glucocorticoids, and so by those guys being elevated, they're going to cause high levels of sugar in our bloodstream, right? Because you're going to have more of those circulating around. You're also going to end up with, in this case, hypomasculinity, right? So in that case, women who typically have issues with the adrenal gland being overactive, they can end up growing like mustaches, more muscle tone, components to that extent. And also, you can also end up with people who are a lot more stimulated in terms of being worked up. And so
Yeah.
always, quick triggers, violent. Okay.
Makes sense.
Okay, so before we go, I want to talk about two other glands. So we have the pineal gland, which is responsible for the production of melatonin. And so we know that melatonin is responsible for kind of controlling our sleep patterns. And so high production of melatonin makes us sleepy. So if you start getting overproduction of melatonin, then you want to sleep all the time, right? So telltale signs. Let's see.
Is this gland only located on the kidney?
Yeah. So the adrenal gland is only located on the kidney.
I think they're both right on top of them.
Yeah,
What's the word? Superior or something?
that's right. Okay, where the pineal gland is not located on the kidney, the pineal gland is actually located posterior to the thalamus.
So the other glands are located on different parts of the body.
Yeah, so we showed that I think that was one of the first images.
Yeah, because I think we went over one of them.
Yeah, we went over all of them. So although we're not showing it here. Yeah, so yeah, here's our kidney, here's the adrenal gland. So the pineal gland is right up here. Okay. The last one that last major gland that I want to talk about. Of course, we have our sex organs and stuff like that, right? We have our testosterone and our estrogens and our progesterones. And so testosterone is going to be responsible for the development of our sexual system. And then also the maturity of sperm cells and body hair, deep voice, muscle mass. And so it's also known that women will have very low levels of testosterone. Nothing compared to us. They typically have so they typically have other things that result in the inhibition of that stimulation. So even though that they don't have testes, they're able to sit there and stimulate from the ovaries, but it's at a much, much lower level. Okay. So the estrogens are responsible for the development of the female reproductive system. It regulates the menstrual cycle, the development of the secondary sex characteristics, such as an increase of adipose tissue, breast tissue, and the maintenance of pregnancy. Progesterone So that regulates the menstrual cycle and then also prepares the body for pregnancy. Let's see. So the pancreas is responsible for actually making a ton of our digestive enzymes. It also is responsible for the productions of insulin and
Glucose related?
yep, glucagones. And so if we actually take a look, the primary production of all of these rely in these pancreatic isolates. So the isolates are going to be made up of 4 types of cells. So you're going to have your alpha, your beta, your delta, and your pancreatic polypeptide cell. The pancreatic polypeptide cells produces pancreatic polypeptide, which are used as hormones. So those guys are taught to kind of control your appetite, and so they're going to be released during meals. So they're going to, as a result, reduce your food consumption. So when they're released, you're starting to feel full. You're like, okay, you know, you want to unbuckle your belt and stuff like that. And the alpha cells, so they're going to be responsible for making your glucagones. Your glucagones basically play a role in your blood level glucose. So in the case of low levels of glucose, it stimulates its release. And then your beta cells are going to be responsible for making insulin. So if your blood level is high, it stimulates the release of insulin. And then you have your delta cells, which are going to be responsible for making somastatins. Somastatins are going to also be released in other areas. So your hypothalamus releases a somatostatin, which is the growth hormone inhibitor hormone. Your stomach and your intestines also secrete them as well. And so all of these hormones are basically responsible for inhibiting. They're inhibitory hormones, so they're going to inhibit the release of both your glucagonins and then also inhibit the release of insulin. And so the idea is that your stomach is going to sit there and send that signal to tell those cells to stop.
Dr. Henry?
Yes.
I'm getting called to get my second vaccine.
Oh, go ahead and get it.
Is there any lab after this?
It's just an online lab.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can still stay. I just need to make sure I can stay. I can leave before 3:15. So thank you.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Okay. Are you with me so far?
Well, they called while you were talking, so you're gonna have to repeat yourself.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So the two major hormones that are going to be made here, from your pancreas, is going to be insulin and your glucagonin. So we know that both of those control blood sugar levels. Glucagonin gets stimulated when your blood sugar level is low, and then insulin gets stimulated when you have high blood sugar level. Okay.
Okay.
And all of that is going to be happening in your pancreatic islet cells. And then, so alpha is responsible for glucagon production. Beta is responsible for
Insulin.
yeah.
So if a person doesn't produce the insulin and should be producing, they could get diabetes or
That is correct. They are considered to be diabetic if they don't. Yes.
I know there's
Because
type 1 and type 2. What's the difference between those two?
so one is a result of a genetic disorder, meaning it's in your genes, and then one is a result of gaining weight, you know, environmental factors.
I think type 2 is gaining weight.
That's right. Yeah. So type 2 is treatable, where, well, they're technically they're all treatable, but with the right diet, one is reversible. We'll put it like that, if it doesn't get too bad.
You could even prevent it. With type 1, you need a pump.
Yep.
Into your body.
Yeah.
My friend had an insulin pump, and he would mess with it before eating. Never really understood how it worked though.
Oh, really?
Like I'm guessing it manually injects insulin into him, and he just measures the dose.
Yeah.
That's what I'm assuming.
So yeah, that's essentially it. It works. So well, it calculates, it measures the dose itself that you currently are producing. Because in most cases, everybody has a basal level. There are a few people that don't, but most cases, people have a basal level of insulin that they're producing. So there's this low level, but their level is lower than what it should be. And so as a result of that, the insulin shot or the insulin pump will actually pump insulin in at certain points. Okay, so the way that this works is, in the case of glucagon, glucagon basically, it's going to stimulate the liver to start storing, to start taking the glycogen that it's been storing in the liver and convert it back to glucose. So in that case, then what you're doing, that process is called glycogenolysis. Okay, so where you're just breaking down glycogen. So then as a result of that, glucose is going to be released, and then your body's going to be able to use it the way it needs to use it. So it's also going to stimulate the liver to start taking up amino acids from the bloodstream. And then it's going to have you convert those to glucose, right? And this process is called glucose neogenesis or gluconeogenesis. So as a result of that, right? So you kind of think about it, where are those amino acids going to be coming from? So you're going to have to start breaking down amino acids from probably your muscles and things to that extent to keep this process going. Or you're going to sit there and do stimulation of lipolysis, which is basically breaking down the fats in your body so that you're getting free fatty acids that could then be processed into glucose as well. Okay, are you guys pretty clear on that?
Yes.
So now insulin, and that's the one that we're all very, very familiar with, right? So insulin. So insulin basically, it causes the uptake of glucose, right? And according to your text, it's not quite sure of how exactly it causes that uptake, but it appears to activate a certain kinase. Okay. So in that case, it causes glucose to be taken from the bloodstream and then it's going to cause the metabolism is going to increase kind of the metabolism of glucose, like glycolysis. So you guys remember glycolysis from your earlier chemistry class, where you break sugar down into what is it? It's you break sugar down to acetyl, I think acetylcholine. I have to look again, but you break it from a 6-carbon sugar to a 3-carbon sugar. You split it essentially, and then as a result of that, you get some ATP generation. Don't worry, we'll be going over it here in a few. Okay, so for homeostasis regulation of blood, we have insulin being, start here. So we have insulin being released by the beta cells. So then the insulin is going to trigger the body to uptake glucose from the bloodstream and utilize in cellular respiration. It's going to inhibit glycogenolysis, which is the glucose is going to basically be removed from the blood and then stored as glucose in the liver. So you're no longer going to be breaking down the glycogen. Instead, you're going to be storing it. It's going to inhibit gluconeogenesis, which is basically your amino acids and your free glycerols are not going to be able to be converted into glucose in the ER. Okay, so as a result of that, your blood glucose concentrations are going to decrease. Okay, and then in the case of glucagon, so the alpha cells in the alpha cells are going to be releasing glucagon. Then glucagon is going to inhibit the body from uptaking glucose from the blood, and then it's going to prevent it from utilizing it in cellular respiration. It's going to stimulate the glycogenolysis. So in this case, you're going to get glycogen broken down so that you're making more and more glucose that you can start releasing in the blood. It's also going to stimulate glyconeogenesis, which your amino acids and your free glycerols are going to basically be converted to glucose. And then that's also going to be released in the blood. So you're going to make new glucose. You're going to break down the stored glucose and glycogen. And then you're also going to prevent that the uptake of blood from the cells. Okay, so a person who's hypoglycemic, right? Hypoglycemic basically meaning they have low blood sugar. So you're going to try to stimulate the glucagon, right? So you're going to increase glucagon in that case. A person who's hyperglycemic, you're going to sit there and stimulate insulin. Make sense?
Mhm.
Yes. So our glucose levels have to be under the 110.
That's right. Yeah. So our glucose levels need to be from 70 to 110. Yeah. So if they're above, if our glucose level is above 110, then we're considered to be hyperglycemic. Okay.
Okay.
And so in that case, we're gonna wanna lower our process, right? Lower that blood sugar level. If our blood sugar level is lower than 70, then we're hypoglycemic. And so in that case, we're going to want to increase, right? So we know that glucagon is responsible for the increase of blood sugar level, and insulin is responsible for decrease of blood sugar level. Okay? Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so we're gonna skip to chapters 23-ish. So chapter 23 basically deals with the digestive system, even though it says metabolism here. Let me fix that. So this is kind of it's going to be very, very brief. We are not going to go over all of chapter 23. We're just going to go over some of the components that deal with the physiological aspects of it. Okay, so we talk about eating an apple, right? Apple day. An apple a day keeps the dentist away or keeps the doctor away. You've heard that saying before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Apples are delicious. They're like heaven, and taking the time to sit there and digest it, and it's a lot of fun, right? So, anybody not like apples?
Not the green ones, but they're pretty good as long as
Yeah.
they're crunchy.
I like the sweet ones too. I like the red ones because they're typically sweeter than the Granny Smith, which are typically the green ones.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the red delicious. My favorite, my choice.
They're
Yeah,
too
some of the
soft.
ones that, what was that?
If they're too soft, no thanks though.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like them crunchy. I like them crisp and crunchy.
I like the green ones because they're too sour. I don't know. I like to stuff.
Are you a sour person?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, sour is okay, but I like sweet. I'm just definitely a proponent of sweet, that process. Okay, so these are the components of the digestive system. Again, we're not going to get in too much into the atomical structures of the digestive system. We're going to be talking more about it, but you need to be kind of familiar where things starting. We know it's going to be starting in our mouth. We're going to go through our pharynx. We're going to go through our esophagus. It goes down to our stomach. We're going to be using components of the liver, of the pancreas, so all of these guys play a huge part in that process of digestion. They're going to be producing a lot of the things that we need, a lot of the enzymes, a lot of the saliva, the fluids that are going to be necessary for functioning and a functional digestion. Okay, so we can sit there and break down the process through various parts and give the function of the different components. Like for instance, swallowing. Swallowing is a result of the oral pharynx region. Just there. And do you guys know what peristalsis is?
That doesn't sound familiar now.
Okay, so we have the food that we're eating, right? And it's going down. Okay, so peristalsis is just the fact that you're getting contraction occurring that allows that pushing of the food that you're eating down tubes, right? So it contracts at this point to cause it to push further, and it contracts at this point to let it go down a little bit further. So it's kind of like you know how you squeeze toothpaste and toothpaste comes out,
Yeah.
right? So in a sense, you're getting that contraction is kind of squeezing at the end of those food particles to sit there and help it push it through that process. Okay, and that's also kind of the same thing that we kind of do for pooping as well, right? You when you poop, you're pushing it through, and then you clamp and you push off, you know. Yeah, no, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it happens at the other end. It happens in the beginning, and it also happens at the other end. So but at the beginning, well, I guess this process, this propulsion is going to be done in the esophagus, it's going to be done in the stomach, it's going to be done in the small intestines, and in the large intestines. Okay, so our chemical digestion, so we know that that's going to be happening primarily here in the stomach area, and in our intestines. We have the mechanical digestion, that's going to be our chewing, our stomach churning. You guys hear your stomach when it growls and everything?
Yeah.
Okay, and it's all rumbly and everything, right? So it's just kind of churning, so to kind of situate things so you can get better digestion. Are you guys growling right now? Did you guys eat lunch?
I didn't eat breakfast.
You didn't eat breakfast? What time do you get up?
Around 8:30, 9 a.m.
Okay.
Why?
I'm just curious. It just, you know, because you said you didn't eat breakfast and it's 1 o'clock, and I'm like, okay, are you just getting up and it's breakfast for you, or?
No, I just got work
Okay.
duties.
Okay, so the other is segmentation. Okay, then we also have absorption. So absorption is just basically when we're absorbing those nutrients. We need to absorb water. We need to absorb, water needs to be absorbed into the blood. So this whole process is taken care of at various parts, right? So small intestines are going to be responsible for absorption of nutrients and water to the blood vessels and to the lymphatic system, or lymphatic vessels. Water to blood vessels are going to be done in the large intestines as well too. Okay. So there are 3 phases to gastric secretion. To that point. 3 phases of gastric secretion. And at these phases, you know, you're going to have various hormones that are going to be acting at these particular points. So we'll talk about that here in a few. So the first one is the cephalitic phase. We know that that's going to kind of make reference to our reflex phase. And so this part basically takes place before the food is going to enter the stomach. And so this phase is going to be kind of triggered by smell, sight, just the thought of food, right? So, and I don't know if you guys, can you guys see that sight of food, the smell, taste, thought receptors. All of those guys are going to sit there and play a part in that. Okay, so anything that looks appetizing, you're hungry, you're thinking about food, man, that burger looks good, you know. So then that's going to trigger us to want to sit there and eat. So as a result of that, that's going to sit there and stimulate our stomach secretory activities to go start working. Things that are going to affect the loss of appetite, like depression. My girlfriend just dumped me, right? So instead of eating, I'm kind of depressed and sad and I'm crying. So then I don't want to eat, right? So then that's going to inhibit my stomach from secreting. Okay, so if we sit there and think about it, that term Seth, right? It also makes reference to it, the head. So thoughts. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. The other phase is the gastric phase. So the gastric phase, so that is going to be the phase that that deals with the actual secretion. So that's going to basically last for about 3 to 4 hours. So in this case, you've already ate your stuff. Your stomach has already been stimulated, and now you're just trying to digest the food. So your food chemicals, your pH is going to be rising. It's going to cause your chemical receptors to be activated. Your G proteins are going, G cells are going to secrete gastrin into the bloodstream. Gastrin is a hormone that's going to be made at the mucus of the stomach cells, of the stomach, sorry, not of the stomach cells, and it's made by those G cells. And so it basically is going to be turned on by the presence of peptides. So basically, if you have peptides and amino acids in the stomach, it's going to be sit there and turn on. Okay, and so, and it basically causes movement of the food and the nutrients through it. So you're going to get mass movements that are going to be happening through there. Let's see.
What,
And so,
what,
oh, go ahead.
what happens when there's a person that probably they eat a little bit late and after eating, their stomach start hurting? Why is that?
Why is it that their stomach start hurting?
Yeah, after they ate, even though they ate a little bit late.
So there could be a couple of reasons that could sit there and cause your stomach to ache, right? It could be a result of too much acidity in the stomach. It could be poor digestion. It could be you could be triggering an allergic reaction. You could be, so it in that case, you're making reference to time. I'm assuming, right? So
Yeah,
if they decided to eat at 7, so and they normally eat at 5, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then that also that has a lot to do with the so your body gets into a routine, right? So normally at 5 o'clock you normally eat, right? So you're starting to think about food right before 5 o'clock, and so you're starting to stimulate those secretory activities. Where if you eat at 7, well, you're forced to eat at 7. You wanted to eat at 5, right? And so your body started thinking about it earlier, but they didn't do it late. And so as a result of that, you're not producing enough of those secretory or hormones in the stomach, and that you're not digesting the way you should, and you're not getting the right signals. And as a result of that, you can end up with your stomach being upset because you don't have those hormones that would normally cause those things to be balanced out. Is that?
Yeah, I heard like when, because sometimes I sometimes I eat late because I'm having something to do. So when my stomach starts to hurt, my mom says, "Oh, it's because all the air that you have."
Yeah. Well, so what happens is you also have to take into consideration that component. Your mom is partially right, because you also have what you call probiotics in your stomach. You have bacteria that are there. And so your bacteria, they get kind of activated by those secretory hormones, right? And so those things become present. And so they're ready for food. So they get active to try to help digest that food because they want to get their fair share of everything too, right? And so instead, what they do, they start digesting components of your layer of your stomach, right? And then as a result of that, they start producing gases. And as a result of those gases, then you're going to get that discomfort. So you're getting agitation that are happening because the bacteria are being stimulated by some of the enzymes that you're producing. And they're starting to break down those enzymes because there's not the food to break down.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and then when I eat too much, my mom, she says, "Oh, just walk around for the food to move." To
Yeah.
And I wanted to know, is that like, because I know there's sometimes that moms, they tell you, "Oh, okay, don't eat too much because you're gonna have this." But I
Yeah.
wanted to know, is there logic connecting to, okay, that's
Yeah,
actually
because you remember that whole concept of churning. Well, you've, in a sense, you've messed up your cycle, your food cycle, right? So you're thinking about food earlier. You're not producing the enzymes that you're supposed to produce. And all of those processes are being controlled by hormones. And if those hormones that are being secreted, if they're being secreted and there's nothing there, it's kind of a big letdown, right? And so your stomach is like, what? You lied to me, you know? Hey, where's the food? Where's the food that I need to be digesting? And there's nothing there. So it's going to digest whatever's there, which is just an empty stomach, right? Which causes pains and things associated with it. In addition to that, you're also stimulating other components such as your probiotic flora that's inside your stomach that also is taking part in that digestion process, right? And so things are kind of tied together. So yeah, in a sense, your mom is right. That churning, right? Because you ate so late and you ate too much or you ate too fast, right? That churning is all disrupted, you know, because it doesn't have all of the enzymes that were supposed to be there at the right time, you know. Have you guys ever noticed like when I eat later than I'm supposed to, you also get contraction of your stomach, right? Because your stomach, again, it gets used to eating at a certain time. If you don't do that, you eat later than what you normally do, it starts to contract. And so when you eat and you're like, oh, you try to shove it all in and you start getting full real fast, right?
yeah,
And you
and
don't eat as much as you normally do.
heartburn, because don't you feel like, oh, there's something burning you, like somewhere around the chest?
Yes, heartburn, yes. Yes, the overproduction of the acids. Okay, so so in this case, in terms of the gastric phase, right? So when we start getting too much acidity in our stomach, that's also going to sit there and causes stomach to inhibit those secretions, right? And so the gastrin is going to decline. And so also emotional distress can cause this problem as well. Sympathetic nervous system also can cause this thing to be activated, which is going to cause inhibition, right? So the fact that you're going to want to run, right? Then you're going to sit there and not want to eat at that point, right? And so you get inhibition under these circumstances, and you get stimulation under these circumstances. Right? The other phase is the intestinal phase. So the intestinal phase is going to be under the presence of low pH and partially digested food in the duodenum. As your stomach basically empties, your intestinal gastrins are going to be released into the blood. And so you're going to stimulate stomach secretory activities. So if you have distillation in the, let's see, I feel like I'm missing something. Sorry. Okay. I am missing something. Okay. So if you have distension in the duodenum, and basically you have presence of fatty acids, acidic, hypertonic, chimers, or irritants, then that's going to cause inhibition again. So that's, again, when we have low acids, heartburn, things like that, that's going to cause us to sit there and be inhibit those stomach secretory activities. Okay. Questions?
So I have a question. So when you when a person usually has too much acid and they usually drink a liquid or something that helps them reduce the acid, what's the actual ingredient that's helping for your body to actually reduce that acid in either a pill or a liquid?
Okay, so it depends. So in the case of the pill, it's bismuth. Bismuth is it's a chemical, right? You guys know. And that chemical actually inhibits it inhibits certain receptors, and or I should say it coats certain receptors. And as a result of its coating of those receptors, then those receptors doesn't allow the H plus ion to be released, and so you're not producing that much acid. Or it is an antacid, like, have you had Tums? So Tums is just basically, it's just something that is gonna bind to that H plus, so you're kind of just neutralizing the H plus, right? So it's a base that you're introducing to the system, okay? If you eat baking soda, right? Baking soda is a good way of reducing acid if it isn't, or heartburn if it isn't too bad, because all that does, it makes carbonic acid. You're going to be a little gassy, bubbly, you know. You're going to make carbon dioxide as a result of that you're going to make carbonic acid, which makes carbon dioxide and water at the end of the day. And so you're going to be releasing carbon dioxide a lot more, so you're going to want to burp and stuff like that. And then there's also protein pump inhibitors. Not protein, proton pump, proton pumps inhibitors. So on the surface of your stomach and everything, to help with the acidity of your stomach, we have these channels in our stomach cells that release H plus, right? And to our stomach to make it more acidic. And that's what causes our heartburn, is that acidity has gone too much. So our acidity is exceeding a certain point, and then our chest hurts, right? Or things like that. So these drugs here, a class of drugs, they actually inhibit pumps, right? Ion channel pumps, and specifically the H plus ion, or in some cases they'll inhibit both H plus and sodium, which is kind of bad because then you're less sensitive to nervous responses. So there were a lot of pumps. There were a lot of antacid medication that was on the market that they took off the market and they reformulated, because the drug that they were using would actually inhibit the sodium pump and the hydrogen ion pump, right? And so your nerve response is reliant on that sodium channel, right? And so you have a sense of loss of nerve as a result of that. Does that make sense?
Yes, because when I have heartburn, I usually have to drink pills, and after a minute or two, my heartburn starts to decrease. But I know there's certain people that they don't use the pills; they use like the liquid one.
Yeah.
Cause
Yep, that's true. That is definitely true. Okay. Okay, so this is so when we talk about, we've already talked about the pancreas and the hormones that are being generated there. So the pancreas is also responsible for generating some of your digestive hormones as well. Specifically in the pancreas, that's responsible for generating those enzymes or those is the acinary cells. And so we already talked about the islet cells, but this is the pancreatic ducts. So this is where all the pancreatic juice is going to be generated from. So the acier cells are located at the, I guess, at the base of the pancreatic duct. They're going to be generating all of those pancreatic juices that we're going to be using. Okay, so those juices are going to be delivered to the duodenum and through the pancreatic duct. So here, and then they're going to be, as I said, delivered to that point. So you can kind of see the pancreatic. You guys can't see my figure, can you? So pancreatic duct here. Okay. So this is basically the gallbladder. The gallbladder is going to be responsible for storage and concentration of bile. And this guy is going to be released into the two-way cystic duct, and when it's needed by the small intestines. So this here is just basically a diagram kind of showing you the digestion of food that's going to happen between the mouth. Okay, so the first stage is that mechanical digestion. That's going to be our chewing and swallowing. Then we have chemical digestion. So we're going to, and then, so that's going to be starting to happen in our mouth itself. So we start digesting a lot of our carbohydrates and fats in those early stages. Can you guys see my track? Can you see my little light there?
yes.
Okay. Okay, so that's going to be happening in this area. And then we're going to have, when we get down here, we're going to have more mechanical digestion. That's going to be peristaltic mixing and proportion. So remember that churning part of things. So that's going to be happening in the stomach. We're also going to have chemical digestions of proteins and fats. And we're going to start getting absorption. Okay, so absorption. So absorptions of lipids, soluble substances. So we're going to be able to absorb stuff like alcohols and aspirins in our stomach. So you guys heard of like aspirins cause ulcers on empty stomachs?
Never heard that. No.
You never heard that? So you're not supposed to take aspirin on the empty stomach or with or under acidic conditions, you know, with orange juice, right? You're not supposed to, but people do it anyway. I'm one of those people, unfortunately. Too much of it could sit there and causes wear and tear in your stomach. So basically, you start breaking down the membrane of the cell lining, okay? And that causes an ulcer, okay? Part of that is because those guys can be absorbed by the membrane itself, and it causes the membrane to slightly dissolve. But you also know that aspirin has a hydrophobic components and a hydrophilic part. It has, so hydrophobic components are like the carbon-based components. So it has carbon chains and stuff like that. Not a big one. So parts of it that is able to bind to the carbon structures, and then we also have things that are able to bind to soluble structures as well. And because you have that, it causes that disruption of that membrane. But it also allows things to be absorbed kind of readily. Okay, so alcohol is absorbed in your stomach. So how many of you guys have had a hangover? Anyone?
Nope,
Never?
not yet.
Okay, good. You guys are two good students. Wow.
No, I haven't experienced hangover. I'm not saying I'm good though.
Okay. Okay, well, so I think I was probably around your age when I had my very first quote. That isn't true. I was much younger when I had my very first quote, but I was in my 20s when I had one when I was all by myself. You know, so
Ooh.
yeah. And I prayed a lot to the porcelain gods. But if you recall that moment, what you feel it all in your stomach, right? That's the first place it starts feeling before it all starts coming back up, right? Part of that is because you kind of maximize the saturation of your cells. So your cells are only able to absorb so much alcohol at a given point. As a result of it, it irritates your stomach. Your stomach says, okay, we got to get rid of that. And so it uses that mechanical mechanism to help push things out. And as a result, you don't absorb the rest of that alcohol. Okay. And you propel things out as a result of that. Okay, so let's go back down. If we keep going down a little bit further, we get down here to our small intestines. So then there we're going to be having a combination of mechanical digestion. So that's going to again be mixing, propulsion, and segmentation. You're going to have chemical digestions. So you're going to chemically digest more of your carbohydrates, your fats, your polypeptides, because we kind of broken everything down earlier. So now we have just polypeptides and nucleic acids. We're going to absorb our peptides, our amino acids, glucose, fructose, fats, waters, minerals, and vitamins. And then we get to our large intestines. We also are going to have that mechanical digestion, and you're going to get mixing, but in segments and proportion. The only thing that's going to be happening at this point in terms of digestion is bacteria are going to be digesting stuff, right? So you're no longer going to have any chemical digestion from our body. It's all going to be done through bacteria. So you're feeding the bacteria at this point. And then you're going to be able to absorb some of the ions, the waters, the minerals, the vitamins, and organic material. Then everything else gets defecated. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is kind of the flow of carbohydrates. So if you recall, think about the very beginning, we start breaking down carbohydrates in our mouth initially, right? So, or we start digesting carbohydrates in our mouth. So like if we have starch and glycogen from, let's say, an animal source or some type of food source, corn or something like that, then we're basically going to be using an enzyme called amylase, and it's going to be the salivary amylase. So that part that's in the saliva. So the saliva is going to be used to sit there and break down those components. So when we start breaking those down, we're going to end up with disaccharides. We're going to end up with maltose, sucrose, and lactose, right? So depending on the source that we're getting the food from, right? So then we're going to be using various enzymes to sit there and do that breakdown further. So maltonase, ASE basically means that it's an enzyme, right? It's an enzyme that breaks down maltose. Maltose is just it's a disaccharide of just glucose. Sucrose is a disaccharide of glucose and fructose. Lactose is a disaccharide of glucose and galactose. So sucrase breaks down glucose and fructose. Lactase breaks down lactose into glucose and galactose. Okay, you guys get that? You understand?
Yes.
Okay, so we start off with, starches are really long chains of sugar. They're basically long chains of glucose in most cases. And glycogen is also the same thing. It's typically long chains of glucose. Occasionally, they will be, so in most cases, if they're all long chains of glucose or glycogen, then this maltose is going to be made. So they're going to be broken down to maltose, right? Now, if they're chains of glucose and fructose, they're starch chains that have glucose and fructose in them, then they're going to be broken down into sucrose. If they're chains that have glucose and galactose in them, they're going to be broken down into lactose. Okay, and then broken down further to the monosaccharides. So for protein digestion, okay, so we're going to have the majority of the proteins are going to be digested in the stomach, and that's going to be done by hydrochloric acid and this enzyme called pepsin. So pepsin kind of cuts up the long chains, because we know that a protein is just long chains of amino acids. So it cuts it up to polypeptides, and then it continues to break it down further, right? So then you get large polypeptide chains. So then as digestion goes on, you start getting protein digestion enzymes. So it cuts those guys up even further into smaller peptides and starts breaking it down to more amino acids. So the small intestines, that's where we're going to get most of our protein digestion. And there you're going to be breaking everything down to amino acids. So at that point, you're going to get those small peptides. They're going to be broken down to just amino acids. And then anything that isn't broken down, we kind of get rid of. So there's going to be a small amount that we're going to lose. Okay. So during this process, your amino acids are going to be absorbed, and then they're going to be able to enter the bloodstream and then travel to the liver. And then the liver is going to be responsible for distributing the amino acids to the rest of the body. Okay, so this is just kind of the diagram of the breaking down of proteins. So proteins are broken down by pepsin. Pepsin breaks it down into these large polypeptides. These large polypeptides are being broken down by specific protein enzymes that are responsible for cutting down proteins into smaller components. So you're making the short peptides and amino acids, and then those guys are going to be broken down even further to amino acids. So this is just the digestive secretions and absorption of water. Okay, so if we sit there, we for our dietary input of food and drink, we take in 2,000 milliliters of fluid. So our saliva digestion secretion is going to be 1.5, 1,500 milliliters. So in our stomach, we're going to be secreting 1,500 milliliters. Our bile is going to be 1,000 milliliters. Pancreas is going to be 1,000 milliliters. Our intestines is going to be 2,000 milliliters, right? And then if you kind of keep track of everything, okay, so saliva, this, okay. So at this point, we've reached that 500 mark, right? When we get down here, we're going to reach our 900 mark. Okay, so the water is going to be reabsorbed by the intestines. So all the water that's going to be absorbed is going to be 7,800 milliliters. So that basically leaves that we have 1,200 milliliters left. So then that's going to go through our large intestines. And then we're going to have our colonic mucosal secretion. That's going to be another 200. So then that's going to bring that 1,200 milliliters to 1,400 milliliters. And then the colon is going to reabsorb 1,250 milliliters. Okay, so we're going to lose about 150 milliliters through our feces. And so all these guys are going to go back and be recycled and be re-inputted into the system. So pretty efficient, right? So with that input of water, right, this is the only thing that we're taking in. Everything else is being recycled through this reabsorption. Pretty efficient or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
It works for us.
Yeah. So, but the problem is that often when we get older, we don't want to drink as much water as we should. When we're younger, we don't want to drink as much water as we should. I'm horrible at it. Right? But I'm really good at eating, right? So a lot of times what we'll do, we'll supplement, instead of getting the drink, I supplement it with food. And then as a result of that, I get a lot more mass put on my body because I don't drink enough fluids. And so you remember when we were all 18 and we had a 27-inch waist and not a big beer belly, because we were still drinking the water that we were supposed to drink. We had a better balance of nutrients. Okay. So this is just a table that kind of shows you kind of the breakdown and what is happening under each of the different circumstances. So the carbohydrates are going to be broken down. So you have products that you're going to make: glucose, lactose, fructose. So in the case of, is that a typo? Oh, no. Okay, so the absorption that's going to be happening, it's going to be co-transported with sodium ion. So you remember when we have those channels that are opening up. So sugar is going to be able to get in because those channels are opening up as well. Okay. So that's what they mean by co-transported. In the case of fructose, we're going to have facilitated diffusion. So basically, we're going to need something to carry it across that trail. And we're over time, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. We have to stop here. I have a meeting at 3. So I will see you guys on Monday, and we'll finish this up on Monday.
Alrighty.
Oh,
Okay.
I have to go get my vaccine, so I'll see you guys on Monday. Thank you for the class.
Yeah.
Have a
No
good day.
problem. You too.
have a nice
Bye-bye.
day.